This week on Crossroads Politics, the cost of cutting property tax bills.
Ours has gone up $200 a month since we bought our house.
There's no way to avoid cuts in public safety.
Lawmakers weigh the benefits of slashing property taxes against $1 billion hole in school and local budgets. And keeping students safe.
Please tell me, how much is my child's life worth?
Should lawmakers put cameras inside Hoosier classrooms? Also, Republicans continue pushing back on DEI efforts in state government. A showdown as two anti-DEI bills are merged in the Senate. Plus,
controversy has paralyzed the local decision makers.
Who should decide what gets built in your backyard? A battle over where to put the infrastructure everyone needs, but no one seems to want. And protecting Hoosiers from medical debt.
I have to wonder how much longer my sister could have lived if her energy hadn't been drained dealing with this medical debt.
The uncertain future of a bipartisan bill to keep Hoosiers from losing their home to hospital bills. Thanks for joining us here on Crossroads Politics on WTHR+. I'm Dustin Grove. In just a minute, we're going to hear from Nikki Kelly, editor of the Indiana Capitol Chronicle. But first, we're going to head to the State House for one of the priority issues of the year, the push for property tax reform. It took center stage this week. Emily Longnecker, lawmakers have been debating a bill to save homeowners a lot of money here, but this plan does come with a price tag.
Yeah, Dustin, $1 billion price tag. You know, we knew that property taxes were going to be a priority this legislative session. Governor Braun said as much on the campaign trail. He campaigned on bringing property taxes back down to what they were in 2021. Property tax rates haven't gone up much since then, but the bills have. That's because of Indiana's booming housing market, where homes in some neighborhoods have doubled in price in just the last few years. Property taxes are based on home value, which is why property taxes have risen faster in the Indy area than any other metro area in the country. Senate Bill 1 is how lawmakers want to bring those bills down. It mostly does it with a huge expansion of the homestead deduction. Deduction is the amount of your home value you don't have to pay taxes on. Right now, it is a maximum of $45,000. SB 1 would make it dramatically more. For homes valued under $125,000, the deduction is $48,000 plus 60% of the home value. In Marion County, there are about 73,000 homes in this price range. Their average value is about $90,000. So right now, they would be taxed on about $44,000 of that value. Under the new bill, they would pay no property tax. For homes valued over $125,000, the deduction is 60% of the home's value. There are 217,000 homes like that in Marion County at an average value of $232,000. Under SB 1, they would be taxed on just $92,000 of it. That's a 50% drop. And it gets bigger as homes get more expensive. The average home in Hamilton County would see a 55% drop in its tax bill. Yeah, the money from property taxes goes back to local communities, local schools, local government. So cutting property taxes means cutting their revenues. Governor Braun has been open about that trade-off in his discussion of property taxes. He's called on schools and local governments to tighten their belts or explain why they can't survive with the drop in revenue.
I would want to see how much of that money can be accounted for with true cost increases. Almost all of them are saying that they can't do without what they're having now. I would say prove it. Prove it that you didn't salt away a lot, that you didn't overburden the taxpayer by maybe making investments in buildings that weren't needed or other things that weren't essential.
Now, as you would imagine, this is alarming local school districts, local governments, and the numbers are pretty staggering. The Legislative Services Agency predicts Marion County would see a $146 million drop in revenue in the first year. Hamilton County would see a $140 million drop in revenue. All told, it would cost Indiana schools and local governments $1 billion total in the first year. That number would go up over time because the bill also caps the growth of property taxes in the future. Now, in a hearing this week, local governments acknowledged the need for property tax reform, but said the scale of the drop would be devastating. At the same time, home prices were rising. Inflation was going up too, making running schools and cities more expensive. The bottom line is, according to Carmel Mayor Sue Finkham, they haven't been wasting this money.
When it comes to the impact of Senate Bill 1, our consultant's estimate shows that in year one, it will eliminate $2.7 billion in assessed value, erase $26.1 million from our general fund, and revert our property tax revenue back to 2019 levels. While we could dramatically cut services and or drastically raise tax rates for the non-homestead taxpayers, either of these actions would undermine decades of careful community building, which would hurt Carmel and Indiana.
And it isn't just big cities and big suburbs that would be hit by this. There was testimony from county councilors from rural counties saying they would have to make painful cuts to things like public safety if this bill passed as is.
There's no way to avoid cuts in public safety. It's one thing to want to say to taxpayers that you cut their taxes. It's another when you have to be honest with them about cutting their services as well. Be prepared to answer.
There was also testimony both in committee and at a fireside chat with Governor Braun, held with people just begging for relief. Many people who are on fixed incomes who are struggling to cover the rising tax bills and are at risk of losing their homes if they can't pay those bills. But a clear tension here, Dustin, between what the homeowners are feeling and the need for services.
Emily, what kind of services exactly are we talking about? I mean, there are a whole bunch here.
Yeah, there's a lot under schools and local government, right? But it really is everything under those umbrellas. We're talking about everything from local departments of public works and parks to police and firefighters, also caught up in that emergency medical services. A group of EMTs was at the State House calling for a memorial for EMTs who died in the line of duty. They've been raising money for that memorial for a decade, and the idea that medical services could lose funding worried them.
EMS has been neglected in the state for some time. I mean, it was only a couple of years ago that we finally got reimbursement rates from Medicaid to change from the rates that were stuck in the 1970s. And so we have been neglected for a long time. And they definitely need funding. We have seen a reduction of ambulances and a reduction of providers as a result. The pay isn't great. Why would someone want to be an EMT and work these kind of hours and see the stuff you see, and whenever you could go and work in a factory and make more money?
But really, Dustin, the heaviest burden is going to fall on the schools. Now, the Hamilton County Treasurer estimated almost 70% of the revenue loss will hit schools in that county. That would be $90 million in the first year. But a lot can change. There was no vote on this bill this week, just a hearing in the Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thanks. We'll check back with you in just a few minutes. I want to bring in Nikki Kelly now, editor of the Capitol Chronicle. Governor Braun, we heard the soundbite used a lot this week. He said, basically, communities, if you say you need all this money, you've got to prove it. Not really a surprise, because this is something he had campaigned about during the race for governor.
Yeah, and he is forcefully going with it. Even today, on Friday, he's going down to Evansville and Terre Haute to have similar chats or roundtables on property taxes. He is really, really pushing it. The school bit is going to be a big problem, because schools don't have, while they're telling cities and towns, well, you can raise the local income tax. Schools don't have that option. And parts of Braun's bill also would try to clamp down on referendums that schools can use. So, you know, the school funding part of this, I think, is going to be what really kind of pulls it back, where lawmakers will do something, but not quite as far as the governor wants to go.
Can you remind us what clamping down on the referendums would mean? Because he's also said that's one option that communities should have. If you say, school corporations, you need more money, put it to the voters.
Some of it has to do with the language on the, public question. Some of it has to do with when they can ask for it. They want to move that to the general election. A lot of them go through the primary election, which has a lower turnout. and they feel like I think they have a better shot than in the general election. So that's an example.
Okay. All right. Be back with you in just a minute. Thank you, ma'am. Another big topic over the last week was health care costs. Lawmakers have said lowering those costs is a priority this year. We learned this is a problem that's putting a lot of families in debt. 1 in 5 Hoosier families, in fact, carries an average of $1,400 in medical debt. So lawmakers are working across the aisle, across party lines to try and address this. Let's go back to Emily at the State House, who's also covering this proposal. Emily, tell us about it.
Yeah, Dustin, Democratic State Senator Fatty Kador worked with some Republicans in putting this bill together. Senate Bill 317 has several parts, among them a part that prohibits banks or collection agencies from garnishing your wages or putting a lien on your house to collect an unpaid medical debt.
She wanted to pay these debts. She did not want to not pay them. She wanted to pay them.
But Joy Fleck's sister, who fought cancer for 8 years, couldn't fight her mounting medical debt from treatments too, especially after she had to quit her job and go on disability.
She underwent the journey of chemo, radiation, and a full bone marrow transplant.
All while fielding calls from collection agencies until she passed away in 2022.
I have to wonder how much longer my sister could have lived if her energy hadn't been drained dealing with this medical debt.
This morning, Fleck told her sister's story of living and dying under the weight of medical debt. She's not alone. 1 in 5 Hoosiers have medical debt already in collections.
My interest in this bill is to protect those who are vulnerable.
Under SB 317, authored by Democratic State Senator Fatty Kador, hospitals would be required to offer payment plans for patients who need time to pay a bill and see if that patient is eligible for free or discounted services. Some who testified questioned the bill's impact on patients and providers.
By treating medical debt differently from other forms of debt, the bill may create an unfair distinction that could be legally challenged.
One lawmaker on the Health and Provider Services Committee also had concerns.
So I am concerned about the fact that your bill is not just protecting someone who's, in your words, the vulnerable, the poor. This is everyone.
But for Joy Fleck, it didn't take long for her sister to go from someone who could afford to pay her bills to someone who couldn't. That's why Fleck pleaded with lawmakers to get SB 317 into law.
Well, don't do just a little, do as much as you can for all of our Hoosiers who are suffering from all walks of life, from all income levels.
Lawmakers on the committee did not vote on 317 this week. Senator Kador acknowledging that some parts of it would probably be revisited before a vote would happen, likely next week. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. Nikki Kelly, that lawmaker working across party lines to get this thing done, but they're also competing with so much legislation. They've got to pass the budget. They're doing property tax reform. Is there enough emphasis on this bill, you think, to get it through or not?
Probably not. Actually, Senator Kador had a couple bills heard this week with no votes, and I think they were, to start a conversation, but they're not quite ready to move forward with them yet. I think the Senate, particularly in step, would like to focus on why those bills are getting high before the debt part, you know what I mean? And so they're trying to focus on the front end rather than the back end. And so, they really only have about a week left to get bills out of committee, and there's a lot on their plates.
All right. We'll come back to you in a few. Thank you, Nikki. Still ahead on Crossroads Politics, fighting for control.
I think local control really needs to stay local.
Indiana needs more power, literally, like more electricity. But does that mean communities should lose their right to choose what gets built in their backyard? We've got the fight over who gets to decide on these big projects. And last month, Indiana carried out its first execution in 15 years. We have the bipartisan push to make it the state's last. But
if you don't understand why it was established, then you should probably not be undoing why it was established.
Yeah, well, based on merit and qualifications.
The battle over diversity, equity, and inclusion. A showdown in the Senate over DEI. Straight ahead here on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. We've heard a lot about DEI this legislative session. First from Governor Mike Braun when he signed that executive order eliminating DEI initiatives from state agencies. Then last night, the Senate passed a bill on DEI by a vote of 34-13. Emily Longnecker, let's head back to the State House, talk to you. You were there for that debate. It was lengthy.
Listen, it lasted about 3 hours between the debate and the questioning of the bill's authors. Then an unexpected moment came right before the vote on this bill involving Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith, who presides over the Senate. We'll get to that in a second. First, let's look at what's in Senate Bill 289. Now, under the bills, schools and state agencies would be required to publish on their websites any training or curriculum that deals with diversity, equity, inclusion, race, ethnicity, non-discrimination, sex, and bias. It also prohibits schools and state agencies from using public funds to hire consultants to promote concepts of those topics. The bill's author, Republican State Senator Gary Burns, said the purpose of the bill centered around the belief that government should treat everyone equally.
I know people are having strong feelings on this bill, and I want to be crystal clear that while I'm against the ideology called DEI, I'm not against diversity. Hoosiers come from many walks of life and many backgrounds, and it's good to celebrate that. What I don't want is the government to say that everyone with a certain trait should automatically get preferential or adverse treatment.
Senate Bill 289 also defines DEI as any effort to, quote, manipulate or otherwise influence the composition of employees with reference to race, sex, color, or ethnicity, which does not include ensuring, quote, colorblind and race-neutral hiring that aligns with federal laws prohibiting discrimination. The bill also says DEI is promoting, quote, differential treatment or giving, quote, special benefits to individuals on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity. SB 289 brought about some pushback from Democratic senators and even one Republican who questioned whether 289 got it right.
Do you understand exactly why these initiatives were put in place?
Explain to me if you would then.
Like why DEI was put in place? I mean, you're the one that's trying to undo it, but do you understand why it was put in the first place?
Explain to me, I guess.
Oh, Senator, I mean, you know, I think that's kind of the point, is if you don't understand why it was established, then you should probably not be undoing why it was established.
Yeah.
We haven't agreed on how to have this conversation yet because we haven't agreed on the common usage of these terms. And how would I read here? It is not my understanding of these terms either. Words that I thought I had a relatively good grasp of understanding before I walked into this discussion today, I now feel as though my common vernacular will no longer be applicable as these terms will be used in this piece of language.
I think merit is important. I think that skills and qualifications are important. How many people of color have been hired into our new governor's cabinet?
I don't know.
We don't know.
No.
Do you know how many black people have been hired into the cabinet, the top level positions for our state?
No, but I'm sure they're hiring the most qualified people, and it doesn't matter what race.
So hiring the most qualified people, and it doesn't matter what race. So in Indiana, about 10% of our population, 640,000 people are black. Out of those 640,000 people, you didn't think that any of them had the qualifications to be a part of our governor's cabinet?
I'm not sure where you're going with this.
No, I'm saying that none of them must have had the merit to get there because I don't see them reflected in the cabinet. But we do know.
Now, one of the bill's co-authors, Republican State Senator Tyler Johnson, who is also a doctor, said he started working on this bill 2 years ago after he says a mentee told him that he felt like he was being discriminated against at one of the state's medical schools.
Our goal here is to remove divisive and discriminatory top-down manipulative ideology. I've had friends that have been asked to attest to ideology that they don't agree with, that violates their conscience. I've had medical students who are no longer at the university because they have been pushed out of medicine. How is that a good thing? We talked to faculty members that put their job on the line because this is a problem. So don't tell me it's not an issue.
The debate lasted close to 3 hours. The vote on 289 was delayed, though, in an unexpected moment when Democratic Senate Minority Leader Shelley Yoder stood up in the chamber calling for a point of order to draw attention to a post made by Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith during the debate.
It is clear that how we started today's session is very different than how we will end it. And during our debate, the very person who presides, our president, posted on his social media campaign site, positioning how this outcome was going to be, while presiding over the debate. There is a sacred division of what we do in this body and in this chamber and the politics of what happens on our campaign sites. And so I stand with my caucus in opposition to this. That is not the behavior that Hoosiers deserve or what is expected of state senators.
I want to make sure that it's stated for the record what was in the post. It says, Hoosier Revolution, Indiana just torpedoed woke indoctrination. The Indiana Senate just dropped the hammer on the radical DEI racket with SB 289, and the left is losing it, all caps. No more taxpayer-funded race hustling. No more forced ideological brainwashing in schools and workplaces. No more woke bureaucrats peddling division under the guise of equity. Hats off to the bold.
And this all led to a request from Senator Yoder and Senator Hundley that the lieutenant governor be removed as chair from the session, and that led to even more debate.
This is the most incredible thing I've ever heard. Telling the president of the Senate, the lieutenant governor, he has no right to freedom of speech. Every one of you guys came up today and used your freedom of speech and talked about those issues and the problems, what was bad, what may be good, just as did some of our members. And you're saying the lieutenant governor, who's an American, is a Hoosier, duly elected, doesn't have the right to express his opinion? There's no rule in this. This is the most outlandish thing I've ever heard of. Saying an elected official of the state of Indiana doesn't have the right to free speech and to express his opinion, just as members of this body has done already. Why are you different than he is? He has the right to it, and I can't even believe you guys would call a question on something like that.
Nobody is questioning whether or not he has a freedom of speech. Say what you want, but on your campaign page, and also having the outcome already dictated, come on, we can do better than this.
The president does have the right to say what he wants to say, Senator Young. It's like I said before, this is a matter of timing. Please, going forward, let's think about the timing. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I could do a lot of things up at this microphone, but I don't do it because it just doesn't make sense for the time. This is not a time for Twitter, and there's sensitive issues on both sides of this. And there are good people who are trying to figure out how we make this work. This is a matter of timing. It's inappropriate. But let's move on and let's recognize that we can build from this and not have to dwell on it anymore. Thank you, Mr. President.
And all of that debate that you just listened to took place before the Senate even took a vote on 289. We caught up with the lieutenant governor after the session to ask him about his post. Take a listen.
Absolutely. I have the right to free speech. I can say what I want to say to you. I mean, just because I'm presiding over the Senate doesn't mean I don't have the right to share an opinion on my personal or campaign page. And so, absolutely, I should. Yeah.
Now, Senator Yoder's request to remove the lieutenant governor as chair over the session was denied, and she appealed that denial. Then the Senate voted to uphold that denial, and ultimately the lieutenant governor did preside over the vote on 289. Senator Yoder had this to say about the lieutenant governor's post when it was all over.
we were fighting and standing up for Hoosiers, debating 289, and the hubris of deciding how that vote was going to turn out. It's disrespectful to Hoosiers. It's disrespectful to those who have elected each of us. We are all duly elected.
Senate Bill 289 now heads to the House, where lawmakers there will take up the ongoing debate. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. Nikki, this was some of the most intense debate, intense back and forth we've seen this session, has it not?
Oh, yeah, absolutely for this session. And I don't expect it to lower the temperature in the House. It's an issue that's important to people either way. And yeah, there's a lot of emotion behind it.
And regarding Lieutenant Governor Beckwith, I mean, he's a disruptor, right?
Well, I mean, he certainly disrupted the Republican Party when he got named lieutenant governor against the governor's wishes on the ticket. I mean, I do understand where the Democrats were coming from at a point. It wasn't so much that he tweeted about how he felt about the bill. It was that he said it had passed when it was still being debated. I think that was the issue more. And also, I know that he came out later and said it wasn't even him that posted it.
Yeah, he said it was a member of
his campaign team.
Okay. Do you think he'll impact votes in the Senate? Or do you think he needs to impact votes in the Senate? Do you think there's already a Republican majority in the Senate?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, he's not, I would say on property taxes, he's going to need to be an impact if Governor Braun's to get that one. And he certainly was pushing property taxes before Governor Braun was.
Okay. All right, Nikki, thank you. Another area where Indiana leadership is aligned with President Trump is on the death penalty. One of the executive orders he signed this week would restore the death penalty at the federal level. Back in December, remember, Indiana carried out its first execution in 15 years when Joseph Corcoran died by lethal injection. He had been convicted of a quadruple homicide back in 1997. Now, there is a bill to repeal Indiana's death penalty. It has some Republicans and Democrats coming together on this, along with members of the faith community to support it. Emily, you were at a rally this week in support of that bill.
Yeah, Dustin, the bill is House Bill 1030, and it is authored by Republican State Representative Bob Morris. It would replace the death penalty with a sentence of life without parole. Now, so far, this bill has not received a committee hearing, but this letter, signed by several Democratic lawmakers, shows that it has some bipartisan support. The letter is written by Democratic State Representative Victoria Garcia Wilburn. 14 other Democratic representatives also signed the letter of support for HB 1030. Part of the letter from Representative Garcia Wilburn reads, "This legislation strikes a balance wherein the person's death sentence is commuted to a sentence of life imprisonment without parole." Lawmakers who support the bill, along with members of the faith community, came together Monday afternoon to speak out against the death penalty and support the proposed bill. 1030's author said executions don't deter crime.
If we're really trying to teach an example to our youth and to others to stop doing these crimes, why are we not doing these executions in a stadium like Lucas Oil Stadium? So everyone can see the person get executed and everyone can learn an example. The reality is, executions don't stop these heinous crimes. And we're taking the life of a human being.
For many left behind, a death sentence offers the illusion of closure and vindication. No act, even an execution, can bring back a loved one or heal terrible wounds. The pain and loss of one death cannot be wiped away by another death.
Representative Morris says he's also filed an amendment to the bill calling for the drug used in executions to be tested 12 to 24 hours before its use to ensure its potency so the person receiving it doesn't suffer. Morris also plans to file a second amendment calling for no state employees to be involved in future executions. Right now, they can volunteer to take part. Morris says that eventually costs taxpayers money, paying for the mental health counseling needed by state employees after they take part in an execution. Representative Morris says that he has talked to Governor Braun about this bill, but says he can't speak for anyone when it comes to this issue of the death penalty, that everyone is really on their own journey, their own faith journey. When it comes to this topic, Morris is hopeful that 1030 could get a hearing in the Courts and Criminal Code Committee to which it's assigned, but we know the clock is ticking for that to be able to happen. Dustin?
Yeah, all right, Emily, thank you. Nikki Kelly, there is bipartisan support for this bill. Do you think it'll get there, though? You think it'll go anywhere?
Yeah, I don't think Indiana is ready to do a full repeal of the death penalty. There might be an available discussion on some of the processes and regulations around it. But again, with only 1 week left, that's a huge debate to have.
This whole issue strikes close to home for you guys because the Capitol Chronicle, you were there for the Corcoran execution. The only journalist, I believe, in the room, is that right?
Casey Smith for the Indiana Capitol Chronicle was allowed to witness. Joseph Corcoran put her on his list. Otherwise, no reporter would have been there because Indiana is one of only like 2 states that bans the media from witnessing the execution, and Casey covered it for us. We felt it was important to have sort of a, an unattached observer of that who isn't really on either side. And so, yeah, she witnessed it. There were certainly only a few minutes of the curtain was actually open, and you could actually see very little of it, and the rooms were small. It was a little confusing, the whole thing, and so hopefully if they do this again, we can get it a little better system.
You've covered the death penalty issue for a while now. What are your key takeaways on this legislation?
Well, I covered Joseph Corcoran I worked at the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette when that murder happened. It was a quadruple. I went out to the neighborhood and interviewed neighbors, and then I covered the trial. I was the court reporter, covered most of the case as it's winded through, and so I think that's pretty rare for a journalist to cover a case from the beginning to the end. I think in this case, guilt was never a question, so that set up, a lot of non-questions. Guilt was always firmly established.
His team had appealed, saying that he was mentally ill.
Mental health issues were the main issue, and I do think back from 1999 when he went to trial, the world's views on mental health have changed quite a bit.
Thank you, Nikki. There is a battle brewing at the State House right now, another battle over local control versus state control. Who should decide whether big energy projects get the green light and where should they be built? I looked into that issue, the proposed solution, and the political pushback.
Everywhere you see soybeans is going to be solar panels.
Back in November, the Schaefer family was locked in a fierce battle to preserve their rural southern Indiana way of life, fighting to keep a 2,000-acre solar farm from moving in next door.
It'll look like we're from Star Wars in an industrial wasteland.
Beyond the appearance, they're concerned about safety and the noise disturbing their animals.
I'd like to present that.
At the local Board of Zoning Appeals hearing, nearly 50 people spoke out passionately either for or against. 3 weeks later, local officials turned the project down. State officials say this is happening across Indiana. Dozens of similar proposals turned down by local communities for a variety of reasons, everything from aesthetics to concerns about property values, zoning, and the unknown. This despite a desperate growing need to start generating more electricity.
Controversy has paralyzed the local decision makers. They are unable to look beyond the angry protesters to see the benefits that renewable energy could bring to all of the citizens of our county.
So state lawmakers are considering a proposal that would essentially bypass local leaders entirely when it comes to infrastructure projects that impact people in more than one county. Not just solar farms, but other kinds of energy plants, plus gas or water pipelines. Instead of having to go through the local permitting and approval process, House Bill 1628 proposes that the state would be the sole regulator. Locals are saying, hold on.
I think local control really needs to stay local. I mean, it's legislated in there. It's like that's taking away local authority.
The head of the Citizens Action Coalition told me they do believe this is motivated by legitimate concerns about energy needs and economic development, but they say cutting out local involvement goes too far.
When you remove locals' ability to have a voice or a say-so
when it comes to radioactive waste that we still have no solution for other than to set it and forget it, and highly dangerous and hazardous pipelines carrying supercritical CO2, carrying hydrogen that pose significant threats to public health and safety. That's a bridge too far.
Even from the bill's own author.
I'll be honest, it's a little hard for me to, I don't like the idea that the state was just going to control and dictate what locals do. However, as Chairman Soliday talked about, we've got to figure out a place to get to so that we can get the energy that we need for all the businesses that want to come to Indiana.
So not exactly a ringing endorsement from the author out of the gate, but I think the consensus in that hearing this week was, let's put something on the table, let's get the conversation started, because something's got to be done.
Yeah, they tried to do this a few years ago, and it died on the last night of session. And so I think they're just trying to take another bite at it, because in those intervening years, we've seen locals being even more strident and blocking basically any new renewables that can be put in. And
I think there was talk that maybe even a majority of counties have had, or maybe do have now, some sort of moratorium on these projects.
Correct, and I think lawmakers are frustrated because they're on one hand getting complaints from locals, from residents about their rising electricity bills, but also not being open to any other options beside what we already have. And so, I think they'll probably dial back the bill a little. But I think, they're really frustrated with all these moratoriums and the fact that all these counties are closing down any opportunity to grow Indiana's electric generation in a different way.
To be continued. Well, could cameras in the classroom keep kids safe?
All I hear is funding, funding, funding. Please tell me, how much is my child's life worth?
Powerful testimony as lawmakers weigh privacy and protection for some Indiana students. Protecting Hoosiers from the lasting harm of eviction. Coming up, we'll be joined by Mirror Indy's Tyler Fenwick, who's been following a bill that was trying to lend a hand to help those who lost their homes. Now, activists are wondering if it has been changed too much to make a difference. But first.
But Republicans like sports and Democrats like sports.
Lawmakers enjoy sports as much as the next Hoosier. How love of the game is bringing lawmakers together and causing some division. Next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. Super Bowl 59 is here, the big games this weekend, and while there are a lot of issues that divide us, the love of sports always seems to bring people together. This week, House Democrats introduced what they call the Hoosier Home Field Advantage, a group of bills and amendments they say moves the ball down the field, so to speak, for the Indiana sports industry, which is a really important part of not just the Indianapolis economy, but central Indiana's as well. Emily Longnecker, let's head back to the State House, bring you in. These bills cover a lot of ground, don't they?
Listen, they do everything from making the Monday after the Super Bowl a state holiday, giving Hoosiers off, to a bill requiring the Indiana Economic Development Corporation to study ways to grow the esports industry here in Indiana. Democrats in the House sported some of their favorite team jerseys to outline some of their proposed bills. Democratic State Representative Mike Andrade, a WWE fan, has an amendment that would require the Indiana Sports Corporation to invest money from the statewide sports and tourism bid fund to help attract and promote more professional wrestling events in Indiana. This comes on the heels of the WWE's Royal Rumble event in Indianapolis recently that saw record turnout. Another bill would prohibit Hoosiers from being charged to stream and watch high school athletic events. House Bill 1292 would establish the Northwest Indiana Professional Sports Development Commission, which would work to find ways to attract a professional sports franchise to Northwest part of the state as a way to create jobs and spur economic development.
It may sound a little funny, but you think about the last 5 years. I think Hoosiers have been through a lot, from a once-in-a-century pandemic. Our political life is more tumultuous than ever, and it seems that people want to divide us along all sorts of lines: race, gender, political ideology. But Republicans like sports and Democrats like sports, and black people like sports and white people like sports. College-educated people like sports, and people like me without a degree like sports.
Not all proposed legislation dealing with sports this session is without controversy. House Bill 1041, authored by Republican State Representative Michelle Davis, would ban transgender women in college from playing on a women's college team in Indiana. Also under the bill, out-of-state teams with transgender women on them would be required to tell an Indiana school before competing against them. And Davis authored similar legislation last year for girls' sports in grades K through 12th grade. After lawmakers passed it, then Governor Eric Holcomb signed it into law. We asked Democratic lawmakers about 1041, which has yet to receive a hearing.
You know, Rep. Harris and I, we both mentioned how grateful we are for our Republican colleagues wanting to be on our bills, right? And so I think all I could say about it is that in the area of sports, the arena of sports, if you will, we're focused on ideas that bring people together, and if that's not the other side's approach to some of these sports issues, you know, I can't speak to that. But I know that our agenda is designed to do the exact opposite. We know that sports are something that bring people together, and really we're just trying to promote that as much as possible while actively benefiting the state and its economy, and really turning away from things that might have the exact opposite effect.
Now, Davis has issued a statement on 1041 before. That statement reads, quote, "The goal of this legislation is to uphold fairness and integrity in college sports throughout Indiana. While males and females are equal in worth, biological differences undeniably affect athletic performance." It goes on to say, to ensure a level playing field, it's important that girls compete against girls and boys against boys. As a mother and legislature, I authored this bill because I've heard directly from Hoosier parents who want to ensure female athletes have a fair shot at competing and earning recognition. Now, the conversation and controversy on this issue is also being seen at the national level. Wednesday, President Donald Trump signed an executive order that bans transgender girls and women from competing on sports teams that match the gender they identify with. Davis was there to witness the signing. His order was titled "Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports." The order mandates that Title IX, which is the federal law banning sexual discrimination in schools, should be interpreted as banning transgender girls and women from participating in sports.
The war on women's sports is over.
The president said not complying would jeopardize federal funding that schools receive. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. Now to an issue that affects thousands of Hoosiers every year. We're talking about eviction. Not only is it disruptive for a family to be forced from their home, but it can follow them for years, making it harder to find their next place to live. So Tyler Fenwick with Mirror Indy has been following this issue and a bill this session to help families get out from under a past eviction. Tyler, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So tell me, what would this do? Originally, what would Senate Bill 142 do?
So originally it would make eviction sealing automatic if you qualified as a tenant. If you had an eviction on your record, but let's say it got dismissed, well, then you wouldn't have to file the paperwork to get it off of your record. Or if you paid off the judgment against you, you wouldn't have to file the paperwork with the court. And right now, that's kind of a big deal for people to figure out how to do that. So that was going to get rid of that and make it automatic.
Now, we said, what did it originally do? Because it's changed, as bills often do. Why did it change, and how did it change?
Well, the key change is that it is no longer automatic. The burden is back on the renter to file paperwork with the court. And Senator Aaron Freeman made this change, an amendment on the Senate floor. And he said he wants tenants who have been evicted to face responsibility.
Housing advocates don't like this change. From their perspective, what's the argument?
The argument is that tenants have already faced responsibility by the act of the eviction. They broke their lease somehow, most likely didn't pay, and so they've been evicted. They've had to go through this legal process, find another place to live. They say that's the accountability.
Why is this so important, do you think, to the people who wrote it, who sponsored, who support it?
This is so important because, as you mentioned, thousands of people go through this every year. It's a statewide problem, and it's a very acute problem in Indianapolis. We have one of the highest eviction rates in the country. You look at the court dockets, people going to eviction court, they are full. These cases roll through pretty quickly, and we don't have a lot of renter protections in Indiana. And so lots of people end up being evicted.
All right, you can find Tyler Fenwick's work on housing, including how the legacy of housing discrimination is still kind of shaping Indianapolis and what to do if you have faced an eviction. It's at mirrorindy.org. Tyler, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your work.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, protecting some of Indiana's most vulnerable kids. That's what one Republican state lawmaker says she's trying to do with a bill that would require schools to have cameras in all rooms for special education students. That would include classrooms, along with seclusion and sensory rooms as well. Emily, this lawmaker proposed the same kind of bill last year, right?
Yeah, she did. This is a bill from Republican State Representative Becky Cash, who herself is a mother of a special needs child. And yes, she did author similar legislation last year. It didn't get over the finish line. And here's the reason why. Requiring schools to add cameras in certain areas, that's going to cost money. And how much money is still the question, really, that is still out there. Some schools already have cameras in their special education areas, but last year we know that was a non-budget year. So passing a bill last year requiring these cameras in certain areas really would have been an unfunded mandate. This year, lawmakers are talking money, trying to figure out that budget. And Cash's bill this year creates a grant fund where schools could apply for money from the state to help pay for these cameras. House Bill 1285 would also require districts to keep the recordings for at least 90 days. That time would be longer if an incident occurred. Parents could also request to see the video themselves. The bill also requires schools to have one person on staff who's trained to de-escalate a situation with a student in hopes that the student would not have to be restrained or put in one of these seclusion rooms. Cash says the bill isn't just about protecting students with special needs.
I have had special education teachers and IAs and such actually call me and ask for the cameras because it protects them too.
The House Education Committee heard testimony on the bill this week. Some expressed support. Others said it left them with concerns about privacy and hiring teachers.
How do I convince a young teacher to come and work for me in a school district if they're going to have a camera on them all day long, from the moment that they walk in to the moment that they go home, when I already have 295 vacancies in the state of Indiana?
Now, while this bill would only apply to students with special needs and their teachers, during the hearing on this bill, we heard from one father who, sadly, his son died by suicide last year. The dad said because of bullying in school. His son was not a student with special needs. And what was very emotional testimony, this father talked about how he believes more cameras in schools could have saved his son Sammy's life.
I am here for every student and every one of us. And the fact that I sit here and listen to the word funding so many times sickens me as a father that has lost my child. All I hear is funding, funding, funding. Please tell me, how much is my child's life worth? Hand, please. You funding people. Camera at this point would have explained to me why my son started flipping desks in school, why he started acting out of sorts, because he didn't act that way at home. He acted like that at one place.
Now, the committee did not vote on this bill this week. It just heard testimony. Representative Cash told me that's because some language needs to be tightened up, but this bill likely could get a vote next week. Dustin?
Powerful testimony, and what a week it has been. Thank you, Emily. Thank you for your hard work covering all of that. That does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. You can watch us every Sunday at the legislative session at 10 a.m. right here on WTHR+. For Emily Longnecker and Nikki Kelly from the Capitol Chronicle, I'm Dustin Grove. We'll see you next time.